Senator Chris Van Hollen said after reading the report that there's enough on the books to be able to point to specific cases and make specific determinations, and on that score, the administration is ducking the hard questions in the report. Do you have a response to that?
So we are pretty clear in our report that the nature of conflict in Gaza and the fact that Hamas uses civilian infrastructure for military purpose makes it difficult to assess or reach conclusive findings on individual incidents. So while we found it reasonable to assess that there have been instances where Israel has not acted consistent with IHL or acted consistent with best practices for civilian harm mitigation over the course of the conflict, the report doesn't reach a conclusive finding because of this very difficult and challenging battlefield environment, as well as the kind of belligerent that we are dealing with. And we have been very clear about that. We have also laid out in the full national security memorandum the other tools that we have at our disposal to assess situations on the ground, not just in Israel, but in any conflict zone, as we do when it comes to violations of international humanitarian law. Those processes continue to be ongoing.
So you keep mentioning that the report makes the administration's position and findings clear. I guess on the flip side of the coin, you have folks like Senator Tom Cotton. His reaction to the report was, he said it's very clear there's no evidence Israel is violating international law. All civilian casualties in Gaza are solely the responsible of Hamas. Given these divergent interpretations of this report, do you think State Department's going to take any steps to clarify those findings further with the Hill or?
Well, I really can't speak to the general confusion among Congress. That's for them to clarify or seek clarification on what is confusing for them. Our report lays out pretty clearly especially the section on the conflict in Gaza. But of course, in the course of this whole conversation, we'll continue to engage with Congress on areas of concern or on questions that they have. And I have no doubt that process will move forward, but I don't have any specifics to share on that.
Is that what Senator Cotton laid out? Is that the correct or accurate? Is that an accurate reflection of the report's
I will
findings?
let the senator clarify his own comments. What I can say from here is what I have reiterated to your colleagues, which is that there have we have not been able to reach or assess conclusive findings on individual incidents, but we find that it is reasonable to assess that there have been instances when Israel has not acted consistent with international humanitarian law or acted consistent with the best practices for civilian harm mitigation. But we'll continue to look at this conflict through the tools that we have at our disposal, and Israel has indicated that it will do so as well. Michelle, go ahead.
Do you have an update on Rafah crossing? Did you ask Israel to open it, and do you support an American company to manage it or to control the?
So we certainly want it to be open, Michelle, for reasons that you've heard me talk about a great time before. One, just Rafah is a region that more than 1 million people are seeking refuge. It is a region that is an important conduit for humanitarian aid. It is the Rafah crossing is the crossing for foreign nationals to safely depart Gaza. Unfortunately, this is not a border crossing that the United States controls, but we are continuing to work around the clock with the government of Israel, with the government of Egypt, on whatever we can do to make sure that Rafah gets open. Obviously, to reopen such a crossing requires some kind of security and operational control on the Gaza side of the border, and we're continuing to work with our partners in Israel and Egypt for that to happen. Kerem Shalom is open, and we are in the meantime trying to maximize as much input through Kerem Shalom as possible, but fully acknowledging that is not enough and that we need to see Rafah reopened as soon as possible.
Did you get any promise from Israel?
So this is something that we're continuing to work with them and work with them directly on. I don't have any updates.
And on an American security company to control the crossing, do you support that?
I don't have any assessment to offer on that, but beyond saying that I think the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have been pretty clear that we're not going to see American boots on the ground in Gaza.
Private company, not the government.
I'm just not, this is the first time of hearing such kind of talks, Michelle. I don't even know if that is a real thing being considered, so I don't have a comment for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you give us an update on the number of American citizens who might still be in Gaza and want to come out, particularly given Israel's start of its operation on Rafah?
So I don't have an update on specific numbers, Camilla, but this is a fluid and quickly evolving situation. So far, over the course of this conflict, we have assisted over 1,800 U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, and family members to depart Gaza through Rafah, entering into Egypt. As long as for when the crossing is open, we expect those numbers to continue to grow. Yeah. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, at The Intercept, we're hearing that there are 2 medical missions of American citizens, doctors who are at the European hospital in Khan Yunis facing dehydration. At least one of them is on an IV drip now. Our understanding is that relatives have been in touch with the State Department, U.S. administration. Is there anything you can say about efforts to get them out? And was the UN vehicle that was on the way to the European hospital part of those efforts?
So let me start with the second part. I'm not sure of the operational and logistical specifics of what was involved in those specific efforts or not, but I can say is that we're aware of these reports of U.S. citizens, doctors, and medical professionals currently unable to leave Gaza. As I said before, we don't control this border crossing, and this is a incredibly complex situation that has very serious implications for the safety and security of U.S. citizens, but we're continuing to work around the clock with the government of Israel, with the government of Egypt, to work on this issue, not just to address the very serious humanitarian assistance concerns that I just talked about, but as you so pointed out, and Matt have addressed before, Rafah is a conduit for the safe departure of foreign nationals, which is why we continue to want to see it get opened as swiftly as possible.
And what does it say about conditions more generally in Rafah and in Khan Yunis if American doctors who only arrived there recently are already suffering from dehydration and malnutrition?
So look, we have not been unambiguous about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It is a crisis. No amount of humanitarian aid at this moment is enough. We need to be doing everything we can to get more humanitarian aid, food, medicine, water, other appropriate supplies into Gaza. And that is why you have seen this administration champion really an all of the above approach when it comes to humanitarian aid. We have been engaging directly with partners in the region to ensure that every crossing possible that can allow for the access of trucks and other things is able to make its way into Gaza. You have seen us undertake airdrops. You've seen our partners in Jordan undertake airdrops, and we're continuing to press and hope that this maritime corridor is a conduit, and we believe that will be the case very soon as well. Go ahead, Rabia.
Yeah. Follow up on Said's question on the CNN report regarding the human rights violations at the detention center in Israel. You asked Israel to investigate itself, but would you support an independent investigation into those allegations?
So on this situation, Rabia, I don't have additional circumstances beyond what has been in the public reporting. So at this time, I don't have any additional independent investigation to call for.
And one thing on the State Department report released Friday, you say that you do not currently assess that Israeli government is restricting the aid, but I want to go back to the April 4 phone call between Biden and Netanyahu, after which Israeli government opened more aid corridors into Gaza and immediately increased the number of aid trucks, and after Biden pressured Netanyahu. So how do you explain Israel's refusal to take these steps 6 months ago, and does this suggest that Israel was deliberately restricting aid?
It does not, Rabia, and I think one of the things that is probably most confusing to me up here from the lines of questioning we're getting is that these issues are not black and white, and certainly this is not a region in which the issues are black and white. Multiple things can be true. Since October 7th, it is correct, we have had deep concerns about the kinds of actions that Israel was taking that contributed to a lack of sustained and predictable delivery of needed assistance at scale, and aid needing to reach the Palestinian civilians who need it. But simultaneously, that does not mean that the government was prohibiting or restricting the delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. We will continue to always want to see more. We want to press for more. And over the past few weeks, we have seen some steps in the right direction, some increase, some that David Satterfield came and talked to you all about. Those improvements need to be sustained now, and we need to continue to see more. But wanting to see more is very different than dealing with the situation in which a country is restricting the flow of aid, and we have not seen that in this case.
But again, you mentioned the steps that were taken by Israel recently, but how do you explain that? Israel could have certainly taken these steps like 6 months ago, right?
Certainly,
do you agree?
we don't disagree with that assessment. But when you are talking about the legal and the policy jurisdiction over this, what we are talking about is whether we have seen a prohibition or a restriction of humanitarian assistance. And while even in the immediate weeks and months following October 7th, we certainly were not satisfied with what we were seeing, we did not see a restriction or prohibition. That is what we are talking about. And that continues to be where we are today. We do not see a prohibition or a restriction on humanitarian aid. We don't see enough going in, and we continue to be pressing every possible way to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, but we do not see a prohibition and restriction.
Just final one. Do you have any updates on the number of trucks currently going in to Gaza? Daily number?
I don't have an update for you today, but I'm happy to check with the team and see if we have any additional for you. DR, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. A question on Iraq. Iraqi Prime Minister.
Can I come back to? I think there might be a couple other Gaza questions, and I'll come back to you. On Gaza?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
The UN has lowered the estimate of women and children who've died in Gaza. Does the U.S. have confidence in those numbers?
So I'll let the UN speak to any revised number that it is assessing. Our urge has been clear that every step possible needs to be taken to protect civilians and adhere to international humanitarian law to prevent further loss of life. Candidly, and any loss of life, particularly of innocent civilians, is tragic. It's heartbreaking and unacceptable to us.
But the U.S. does not have its own estimate.
This is something we've talked about before. There is not, aside from the Gazan Ministry of Health, there is not another metric or count out there when it comes to the deaths that have transpired in Gaza.
And just a caution, this report attributed to the UN seems to be false. Just so you know.
Pardon me, Said?
This report attributed to the UN seems to have no veracity.
I will let the UN speak to that. Again,
I'm just bringing that up so people are aware.
Thanks for your clarification. Go ahead in the back. On Gaza?
On Gaza, yeah.
Go ahead.
You say there are instances where the Israelis have acted which are not consistent with international humanitarian law, but you can make no definite conclusion. A lot of people will be asking, where's the gap? Why can't you make a definitive conclusion? And is it a political gap rather than a legal gap?
It is absolutely not a political gap. It is a gap rooted in the circumstances on the ground and the kind of belligerent that we are dealing with. We are unable to make a conclusive determination because of the kind of hostilities that the Israelis are engaged in right now. We are dealing with a belligerent Hamas, a terrorist group that has a long track record of co-locating itself within hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, other kinds of civilian infrastructure, using civilians as human shields. So we're unable to make a conclusive determination. But like I said, we do think it's reasonable to assess that there have been instances in which our partners in Israel have not met their obligations for abiding by international humanitarian law.
And can we follow up on that?
Yeah.
How do you have better visibility in Ukraine when there's a belligerent, as far as the US is concerned, with Russia, but you don't have that same level of visibility when you're dealing with an ally in Israel?
Your question is rooted in the premise that we're talking about apples and apples here, and that is just simply not the case. We are talking about two very distinct circumstances. Let me just give you one example. First and foremost, not now, not ever has the Russian Federation ever proven itself to be an entity that can hold itself accountable, that can police itself, that can bring perpetrators to justice within its own system. Israel, on the other hand, is taking steps consistent with its own system to hold people accountable, to bring people to justice. I will just point back to the World Central Kitchen tragic incident. In the immediate days after that, you saw the government of Israel take appropriate action as it relates to a number of officers within its own Israeli security services. We have never seen the Russian Federation do something similar. Your also question is rooted in the premise that Israel and Russia are somehow the same, which they absolutely are not. And if we want to talk about this, let's talk about how Hamas is, again, co-locating itself within civilian infrastructure, co-locating itself in places like schools and hospitals, using civilians as human shields. I will say that there is so much space and so much night and day between the Ukrainian army and Hamas. But that is not even something. That's not something the Ukrainian army is doing. So I appreciate that people in the media enjoy making this comparison between Israel and Russia and the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza. But we're not even talking about apples and oranges. We're talking about apples and candy bars.
But we're talking about enemies. We also seem to be talking about enemies and allies.
We are talking about two very distinct and different circumstances on the ground that are not even comparable. Go ahead.
But his question was not about what the Ukrainians and Russians are doing or the Israelis and Hamas are doing. His question was about your visibility. How could you have
our visibility into whether a government has the ability to hold itself accountable is absolutely something that plays into this.
But it's not about the government of Israel, the government of Russia. How could you have eyes in Ukraine to determine? Because technicality, I think what you mean by violating international law that you have to prove intent. This is the standard, right? Intent to violate. But how did you have the intent, to find the intent with the Russian army to violate international law when you concluded that the Russian army did war crimes in Ukraine, and you couldn't find that with your allies?
So, again, we are talking about two very different and distinct circumstances, and the things that we are seeing in Ukraine, the things that we are seeing Russian security forces do in Ukraine, mass executions, things like Bucha, the conscription and the forced relocation of children, I am not at all saying that Gaza is not in crisis and it is not a humanitarian major area of concern. But these are two very different and distinct circumstances, and the actors in both of these situations could not be more different. And again, a big piece of this is that we have never seen the Russian Federation try and hold itself accountable, to hold its security services accountable, to bring perpetrators within their own system to justice. And we have seen and we have heard from our Israeli partners that they are doing so.
Sorry, one more quick question on this. So, was this an independent US investigation to decide whether or not Israel had broken international humanitarian law, or was this a US investigation aided by the Israelis?
The Israelis were not involved in the production of the United States' National Security Memorandum.
That's not an answer to the question.
Go ahead. I think there's probably a couple other questions on Gaza. Go ahead.
On Friday, the UNRWA shut down its office in occupied East Jerusalem because of 2 Israeli arson attacks. The Israeli police and fire departments didn't come out to put out the fire. It took a long time for them to come out, and the employees of UNRWA had to put out the fire while Israeli mobs were outside chanting with sticks and throwing rocks at the UNRWA employees. Israeli police said that they couldn't prosecute because it was apparent to them that these were minors that did this, these arsons. And they said that according to Israeli law, they do not prosecute minors. Do you have anything on this? I have a follow-up to this, but are you aware of this?
I'm not aware of this report, and I would defer to local officials and authorities to speak to this. What I can say is that any kinds of actions like these certainly are not helpful for peace and stability in the region. They take us further away from a 2-state solution, which has continued to be this administration's goal. I will say UNRWA continues to be an important humanitarian player in the region and a key distributor of humanitarian aid, and one that does important work. But this is a largely localized issue. I don't have anything.
Well, it's UNRWA, but now on the other hand, the government of Israel has a policy of detaining minors, Palestinian minors, in the West Bank. Between 400 and 600 are the estimates every single year. And my question is, given this difference, which many international humanitarian or human rights organizations say that Israel is an apartheid state and is practicing apartheid in the West Bank and in Gaza and in Israel itself, how does the United States not acknowledge this apartheid when it's very, very obvious that there are 2 different treatments of minors?
When it comes to detention, we have been clear with our partners in Israel that they need to abide by international humanitarian law, and human rights need to be protected when it comes to its detainees. But the decision of prosecution or not, or how our partners in Israel or the PA or otherwise, or any entity, how they choose to enforce their local laws, I'm just not going to get into that.
But I mean, it's a consistent practice. It's not something that happened one time or two. Over years, many years, it's very consistent and obvious. And
again, I'm not going to speak or comment on this specifically. What we have been clear about is that actions like these, they detract from our ultimate goal of peace and stability in the region and getting us towards a 2-state solution. I'm going to work the room a little bit. Go ahead in the back.
On Iran?
Let me see. Is there anything else on Gaza before we move away? Okay.
Hamas is saying that it lost contact with a group holding 1 American hostage. 4 hostages, including 1 American, because of the bombing. Is that something you're?
I wouldn't speak to those kinds of assessments from up here. I don't have anything on that. I'm happy to check though, Sean. Go ahead.
Thank you. It seems that the Iranian nuclear ambitions is getting more momentum at the moment inside the country. The Supreme Leader's senior advisor, Mr. Kamal Kharazi, recently has said that in the face of threats by the enemy, referring to Israel, the Islamic Republic will have no option but to change its nuclear doctrine. Do you have anything about that? Is that a concern to U.S. that Iran may change its nuclear doctrine? Because we knew before this they were not pursuing a nuclear bomb.
So first and foremost, let me reiterate what you've heard me say before, is that President Biden, Secretary Blinken will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, period. We continue to assess, though, that Iran is not currently undertaking the key activities that would be necessary to produce a testable nuclear device. And we don't believe that the Supreme Leader has yet made a decision to resume the weaponization program that we judge Iran suspended or stopped at the end of 2003. But again, we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, period.
But knowing that Islamic Republic is a threshold nuclear threshold state. Do you have any new strategy for now about that? Because the negotiations at the moment is going nowhere. There is no negotiations based on what we hear from you, not based on what we hear from Islamic Republic. They are claiming that there are ongoing behind the curtain negotiations. So what are you doing at the moment about a country that we know it's a nuclear threshold state?
So let me just say this, that we have ways of communicating with Iran when it's in our interest. I'm not going to comment on them, but I will just reiterate that we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, period. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. DR, go ahead.
Thank you.
No.
As you know, the Iraqi Prime Minister has requested the Secretary General of the United Nations to end the United Nations Assistant Mission to Iraqi Army by the end of 2025, and saying it's no longer needed because Iraq has made significant progress towards stability. But what's your comment and position on that? And do you believe that now it's time to end the UN mission in Iraq, as there's a lot of issues has not been solved, like the disputed areas, disputes between Erbil and Baghdad, and also the risks of militia groups that becoming stronger and gaining more power in Iraq?
Thanks for your question. So the UN Assistance Mission for Iraq, that was a mandate that was established back in 2003. The U.S. has strongly supported the mission's work in providing not just electoral assistance, but facilitating regional dialogue, ensuring appropriate delivery of humanitarian assistance, and supporting the voluntary returns of displaced Iraqis. But it has also served as a mechanism to advance progress on the return of Kuwaiti property and the National Archives and the repatriation or return of all Kuwaiti and third country nationals. So we are working with the government of Iraq and fellow Security Council members to ensure an orderly and responsible wind down that meets not just the needs of the Iraqi people, but also maintains progress towards the final resolution of outstanding issues between Iraq and Kuwait.
And may I ask a question on China and U.S. meeting in Geneva? Yeah, does that meeting in Geneva with the Chinese on AI, it's to voice concern about where they pose threats to U.S. national security, or there will be discussions with aims at promoting technical collaboration on frontier research between the U.S. and China?
I'm going to let these conversations happen first, and then I'm happy to circle back and give you a sense of what was discussed. Alex, go ahead. And then I'll come to you, Sean. I'll get a couple. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks so much to you, boss. Just very quickly on Ukraine, then I want to discuss Georgia, if I may. What was the assessment of the last 24 hours in Ukraine, the situation on the ground, this new offensive towards Kharkiv? Is that the new target, the ambition to retake the city, if you think, and if it requires any pulse update on you?
So Russia continues to press its aggression, and we anticipate that Russia will attempt to press forward within Kharkiv as well. And it's possible that Russia will make further advances in the coming weeks. But we do not anticipate any major breakthroughs, and over time, the additional influx of U.S. assistance and continued support from partners will enable Ukraine to continue to withstand this kind of aggression. We continue to feel strongly that Ukraine retains the key advantages in this fight, and its military remains a brave and effective fighting force that is imposing significant costs on the Russian military.
Thank you. Moving to Georgia, if I may. What is the State Department's characterization of the events in Tbilisi in the past 24 to 76 hours, and given the fact that they are going to vote, the final vote is going to happen tomorrow, what will the next 24 hours look like in your opinion?
So, Alex, I think this is the common through line here is that the kind of actions that we're seeing, they are inconsistent with the self-stated aspirations of the Georgian people, not something that other countries or the United States are saying, but the self-stated aspirations of the people of Georgia. More than 80% of the Georgian people want EU membership. We support that aspiration, and we urge the government of Georgia to continue on a path of EU integration, and one that's consistent with that. The Georgian government has said that it wanted to join the EU and have a relationship with transatlantic alliances such as NATO. But this kind of legislative activity that's being pursued, this kind of government action, its current activity, it is inconsistent with those stated goals.
I mean, given that, and given it's clear that the GD government, Kremlin-backed government, is departed from that aspiration. To listen to your messaging, there's a messaging crisis here. You are urging them not to do it because it's going to damage the U.S. European relationship with the GD, which is their goal. One would argue, without suggesting any real consequences.
Well, Alex, we're certainly not going to preview any kind of consequences or actions publicly. That's not how we've gone about it. But we think that raising alarm of these kinds of actions is certainly enough of a fire alarm, we hope, and we'll continue to consult closely with our partners in Europe on this.
Can you tell us anything about the 2 American citizens that have been illegally detained and brutally beaten by the GD government?
So we're aware of those reports, Alex, of U.S. citizens detained in Tbilisi. Whenever a U.S. citizen is detained abroad, we stand ready to provide all appropriate assistance. But given privacy considerations, I'm just not able to talk more about this.
Has the embassy reached out to them?
Again, given privacy considerations, I'm just not able to talk more. Sean, go ahead.
Maybe just briefly to expand on that. I mean, are you explicitly called on Georgia not to go ahead with the foreign interference law?
So that ultimately is a decision for the Georgian government to make, but what we are saying is that this kind of law, not only is it inconsistent with their own aspirations, it is in fact consistent with the kind of repressive legislation that we have seen come from other regimes, whether it be the Kremlin or otherwise.
Speaking of the Kremlin, do you have any analysis, perspectives, commentary on the shakeup at the Kremlin? Shoigu, the longtime defense minister, being shifted and having a technocratic economist.
So I've seen the reports of the reshuffle in the Kremlin, Sean. Our point of view is that this is further indication of Putin's desperation to sustain his war of aggression against Ukraine, despite it not just being a major drain on the Russian economy and heavy losses of Russian troops, with some estimates as high as 315,000 casualties. The Kremlin's mobilization of its war of aggression against Ukraine has caused so many families in Russia to suffer. And Russia started this unprovoked war against Ukraine. Putin could end it at any time by withdrawing its forces from Ukraine, instead of continuing to watch brutal attacks on the Ukrainian people every day.
I could expand on that, but just in the interest of time, a completely different topic.
Yeah.
India and Iran. India signed the Chabahar port in Iran, a deal to develop for 10 years. This, of course, is seen by India as a counter to the Chinese-built port in Pakistan. Does the U.S. have any view on this, particularly considering the U.S. relationship with Iran?
So we're aware of these reports that Iran and India have signed a deal concerning the Chabahar port. I will let the government of India speak to its own foreign policy goals vis-a-vis the Chabahar port, as well as its own bilateral relationship with Iran. I will just say, as it relates to the United States, U.S. sanctions on Iran remain in place, and we'll continue to enforce them.
Does that mean including against Indian firms potentially?
So broadly, Sean, you've heard us say this in a number of instances. Any entity, anyone considering business deals with Iran, they need to be aware of the potential risk that they are opening themselves up to and the potential risk of sanctions.
So there's not an exemption for this specific?
No.
Just one on Brazil.
Yeah.
With the severe flooding in South Brazil, there's reports that the weather is set to get worse. I saw that the State Department had issued a release saying that the U.S. stands ready to help. Is there any action that the U.S. has taken at all towards assisting hundreds of thousands of people who are affected, who've been displaced from their homes? And has the Lula government reached out at all to ask?
So I don't have any conversations to read out. We're continuing to engage within our interagency and other partners. We stand ready to support the Brazilian government and the Brazilian people. We stand ready to assist them, but I just don't have anything to preview or announce at the moment. Daphne, go ahead.
There's reporting that the U.S. ambassador to Germany has informed colleagues that she'll be returning to the U.S. this summer, leaving a major vacancy. Can you confirm this, and are you concerned about this vacancy at this point?
I don't have any personnel announcements to get into right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. If I may ask two questions about Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lowe visiting this morning Bangladesh. The first thing I want to ask, is there any specific reason why on this third visit to Bangladesh within 17 months, Assistant Secretary is not holding meeting with any political party leaders, unlike his previous two visits where he engaged with various political parties, including BNP. Has the United States shifted this position on internal political matter in Bangladesh?
It has not. A lot of factors go into who our government officials meet with or not, the schedule, time of day, lots of other things. Assistant Secretary Liu is on a swing through a number of South Asian countries, specifically India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. He is there to strengthen bilateral cooperation with each country and to demonstrate U.S. support for a free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. In Bangladesh, he will meet with government officials, civil society leaders, and other Bangladeshis to talk about deepening our U.S.-Bangladeshi cooperation, including deepening our economic ties and ways that we can collaborate further to address climate issues. Go ahead. You had your hand up in the back. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Malahat Najafova. I am from Azerbaijan State News Agency, and my question is about the Azerbaijan and Armenian foreign ministers meeting in Kazakhstan. And did you have any communication with the sides about the results of the meeting? And in general, what kind of communication do you have with the sides in this level of negotiations, peace negotiations? I mean.
So I don't have any specific engagements to read out. What I will just say is that when it comes to the Nagorno-Karabakh region, we continue to believe that a peace is possible. It's something that the Secretary and others continue to remain deeply engaged on. I don't have any updates on the negotiations between the parties, but we will continue to support this process.
And any upcoming visit of Mr. Bono to the region?
I don't have any travel to preview. All right. Thanks, everybody.